Fortress El Morro, since 1539 guardian of the harbor. Its cannon pointed seaward, discouraging those who might seek the prize it guarded. The port of San Juan, the island of Puerto Rico, and the rich cargoes of sugarcane, ginger, cotton, chocolate, and indigo that flowed from the Spanish colony. El Morro protected San Juan from attack by sea. Her cannons were the match for such weapons as her enemies, England, France, and Holland, could bring against her in the Caribbean. But times change, and the defenses of one era are only relics against the enemies of the next. In early March 1968, a new enemy set itself against the harbor of San Juan, launching an attack under the helpless, rusting guns of the old fortress, threatening San Juan with a menace as destructive to the modern port as English raiders of the past had been to the old Spanish colony. This new menace, oil. Sunday morning, March 3rd, and San Juan awoke to face its adversary. A Liberian tanker, the Ocean Eagle, carrying over 5.5 million gallons of Venezuelan crude oil, went aground just outside the Bar Channel, breaking in half 500 yards off El Morro, spewing millions of gallons of thick, black crude from ruptured tanks, spreading the sticky slime slowly into the harbor. Less than 2 hours after the first call for help, the Ocean Eagle, her bow held fast in a coral vise, broke in half just aft of the bridge. The stern section went aground just opposite Isle de Cabres, and the bow pitched up crazily at a 45-degree angle just outside the Bar Channel. Helicopters, commercial tugs, and Coast Guard vessels answered the call for assistance, and the Greek captain and crew were removed safely. Navy salvage vessels participating in nearby NATO exercises were dispatched to San Juan to attempt removal of the bow section. The Navy tied a line to the bow, hoping to pull it free from the grasp of the coral channel bottom, remove the navigation hazard, remove the remaining oil, tow the ship from the harbor entrance before other tanks ruptured and more oil polluted the water. But the Ocean Eagle held fast. She could not be pulled free with the weight of the oil still in her cargo tanks. From El Morro, tourists and natives watched the tug-of-war. To the people of San Juan, anything hindering the flow of tourist and maritime commerce would be a major disaster. And the wreck resting just outside the Bar Channel and oil slick spreading into the harbor had all the earmarks of such a disaster. Meanwhile, the owners of the ship formally announced they were abandoning the vessel, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, charged by Congress with keeping all navigable channels open to traffic, assumed the immediate responsibility for salvage of the Ocean Eagle. Personnel from the Corps of Engineers Jacksonville District Headquarters flew to San Juan to direct the salvage operations and to eliminate the source of oil pollution. Ship traffic was permitted to enter and leave the harbor cautiously, but until they could be removed, the two halves of the Ocean Eagle remained a persistent hazard to navigation, especially if the weather worsened. And the oil continued to spread. Within a few days, the harbor was black with it, and the beaches were badly polluted. It was decided that the remaining oil would have to be pumped from the two sections of the ship before they could be removed. A storm could cause even further ruptures in the ship's storage tanks. Time and oil pollution were the enemies. Army engineers, using an existing Navy contract with a marine salvage firm, negotiated an agreement for the removal of the oil and the disposal of the stern section of the ship. The Corps of Engineers entrusted responsibility for the bow section to the salvage teams of the Navy. Divers went down to inspect the damage. It was impossible to see through the polluted water. But using their hands, they found great gashes in the sides and bottom of each section. The entire salvage operation had to be finished before the weakened tanks or a sudden storm poured more oil into the sea or shifted the bow into the channel. Quick inspection determined which tanks were ruptured and which were not. Engineering calculations revealed that both sections could be refloated. A decision was made to pump seawater into the cargo tanks of the ship as the oil was pumped out. This would eliminate new stresses on weakened steel plating and keep the weight of the ship constant so she wouldn't shift during the salvage operation. When the oil was gone, the water could be pumped out and the two sections of the Ocean Eagle refloated. A good plan, but a tough job. Rough seas bring in salvage equipment by helicopter. Keep the pumps working. Oil from the ship to the waiting barges. Water from the sea into the emptying tanks. 24 hours a day, everything either uphill or downhill. Repairing pumps, mending oil lines, dirty work, racing the weather. The Ocean Eagle was giving up her cargo. Across the way on the stern section, much the same battle was fought. The federal court had attached the vessel until determination of liability could be made. Venezuelan crude is volatile and dangerous. The stern set high above the water. Pumps on the barges below drained the oil, and others filled the tanks with seawater. Oil lines were moved and replaced. Air compressors ran continually, and the pumps demanded constant attention. Hard work, around the clock. Each loaded barge leaving the wreck lessened the menace to the harbor. In the harbor and on the beaches, the oil was taking its toll. The shoreline of the Isle de Cabras was black. The harbor was polluted. Sandy beaches were not spared. Pelicans became oil-soaked and unable to fly. Local citizens teamed up to save the birds. They were cleaned and fed. Some survived, others did not. Fish were also victims of the oil. Private enterprise constructed experimental floating fences or oil booms to protect property, but they were not very effective. Meanwhile, the government of the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, working with federal agencies, had every available man fighting the oily scum. Many detergents were tried, but warnings came through that the overuse of chemicals and detergents could damage the beaches, and the chemicals were just as destructive to marine ecology, if not more so, than the oil. As efforts to empty the broken vessel of oil continued, new means were found to fight the scum on the water. A dry, granular absorbent composition helped clear the oil from the beaches. It absorbed oil. The absorbent was applied to oil-contaminated areas by small boats. As it washed ashore, it was raked into piles, and the accumulation of oil, composition, and seaweed was hauled away to a disposal area. Different forms of polyethylene and polypropylene materials were tested, and those that showed possibilities joined the arsenal against the oil. Where the accumulations of oil were worst, the weapons were large tank trucks equipped with pumps and flexible intake hoses. As the cleanup continued on the beaches, public hearings were conducted by the Corps of Engineers. These hearings had been scheduled even before the Ocean Eagle ran aground to discuss plans for a multi-million-dollar harbor improvement program. This program would widen the bar channel, now marked by wreckage, from 500 to 1,000 feet, and alleviate the necessity of a sharp 56-degree turn after entering the harbor. The wreck of the Ocean Eagle had placed a new emphasis on the hearings, and the public showed its concern for the present disaster. Back on the wreck, the pumps had been working constantly, and finally, the last of the oil was taken from the bow section. Across the channel, one more barge load would complete the messy job on the stern. More than 2 million gallons of crude oil had been salvaged from the wreck. 2 million gallons towed to oil docks in the harbor, purchased, pumped inland, and processed by a large refinery. Now the oil was gone and the threat of further pollution eliminated. The final operation, refloating the 2 sections of the Ocean Eagle and towing them to deep water for burial. And this was not a simple operation. There were no salvage facilities close by. An economic analysis disclosed that it would cost more to tow the 2 sections of the ship to a port with salvage capabilities than the salvage value of the wreck. Before the bow could be refloated, 4 sets of beach gear were rigged to hold the Ocean Eagle in place when she was pumped free of water and refloated. A small line was shot aboard. Then a larger line paid out. And finally, a cable which was made fast to an anchor. The salvage vessel moved into position. And the anchor was cut away to help hold the wreck in position once she began to float. Early morning, April 3rd, and the men of the USS Preserver wanted all the daylight possible for the job of refloating the bow section of the Ocean Eagle. Again, a bow line was made fast to the wreck. A heavy hawser followed the small line. And finally, the towing cable attached with inflated buoys was reeled up. This flotation system made the cable easier to pull. Once the towing cable was in place, the salvage crews moved to the attack. An attendant barge with generators and air compressors was tied alongside, and as soon as the pumps were started, water from the storage tanks flowed across the decks and back into the sea. Around noon, the salvage ship Preserver began to put a strain on the towing cable. Cable tension was measured on a gauge, and a tension lock winch kept the cable within the safety margin. All through the day, pumping, pulling, and still the wreck held fast. All night they manned the pumps. Dawn again. And finally, the bow section of the Ocean Eagle was alive in the water, pitching and rolling, but held fast by the beach gear. Soon the cables were released, and for the last time she pointed her nose toward the open sea. The work barge was the heartbeat of the bow section as she limped to the disposal site. More than 9 miles at sea, preparations were made to administer the last rites. As she began to struggle for life, the men who had worked so hard for this hour had mixed emotions. Whether by design or by accident, a sinking ship is a depressing sight. Part of the Navy communique read, "This is to certify that the Liberian steam tanker Ocean Eagle has been refloated from her stranded position near the Bar Channel entrance, San Juan, Puerto Rico, and delivered to her new master, Neptunus Rex." Six days later, the Corps of Engineers directed the final removal of the stern section. The generators to power the submersible pumps were fitted with side runners and pulled up the lee side of the wreck by hand. Once the pumps were activated, water poured from the ship at a rapid rate. First 1 pump, then 2. And soon the salvage ship and tugs began to drag the Ocean Eagle from the Bar Channel into deeper water. For the first time in 36 days, the stern section trimmed out on an even keel. Inspectors examined torn steel plates, visible now for the first time and covered with green algae that had taken over quickly in the tropical water. After dewatering equipment had been removed, the stern section of the Ocean Eagle began her funeral march, pulled by a powerful salvage ship. As this last reminder of a disaster was towed toward the open sea, San Juan took a last look at this once formidable adversary. 2.5 miles from the grave of the bow section, the Ocean Eagle's stern stopped. Demolition experts completed preparations to detonate 50 pounds of a plastic explosive, composition 3, in her midsection. The salvage crew boarded a Navy LCM, and from a safe distance, the salvage master detonated the charge. She slowly began to sink. Healed up, showed her jagged scars. One final gasp, then she was gone. But the Ocean Eagle would be remembered. Remembered by the men who brought her here and by all who had helped protect San Juan from her menace.